The following presentation was made possible by supporters like you. Consider making an impact today by honoring Science for Georgia with a gift, or by joining our Catalyzer network. Thank you, and enjoy.
So, the story I'd like to tell everyone is a little bit about the community-driven clean energy plan that Greenlink, along with some partners, did for Decatur. So a clean energy plan, what is it really, right? So more and more cities and states are looking forward to decarbonizing their operations, whether it's their energy grid, whether it's their transportation, whether it's just their day-to-day operations. It is important for us to understand how much carbon dioxide we're putting into the air as a way to understand how much we can stop putting into the air and where opportunities are. The good news about a lot of these opportunities is they come with things like jobs and better benefits in terms of finances and some education components. So there's a lot of good that can happen here from a clean energy plan that's not just about saving our environment. So I'd like to frame that to start, because as we're going through it, I just want you to think about where else clean energy plans could be helpful, right? More than just the environment. So if I can get to the next slide. This clean energy plan started with Decatur's vision for their strategic plan. And it said, as I've noted here, Decatur will foster an equitable, thriving, and welcoming community for all today and in the future. I mean, that already sounds like the base of a climate action plan. We're talking about equitable, we're talking about welcoming community, and something that's thriving. Well, I'll tell you what wouldn't be thriving if we continue to heat the world and we don't have the ability to subvert natural disasters. Communities are going to get affected really quickly and pretty harshly. So this already sets a really nice foundation. And more importantly, if you look at the couple of bullet points that are listed in their plan, they mention a number of items, but number 2 is confront climate challenges. So they're already thinking about it. The residents of Decatur are already understanding of how important climate challenges are to a equitable, thriving, and welcoming community. So what does this actually look like? How does one actually even go through creating a community-driven climate plan? I've got a couple of different ways to think about it, and being the data translator I am, I've got it in both the cold and hard formal terms. The way I would talk about it with some friends, and then my favorite way, just through visual memes, right? So we're starting with something like a project launch, and that's really just initiating the community engagement. So that's pressing that button and getting everyone in the room, getting ready to go. Then there's an input and awareness side, which involves collecting information from the community, understanding what the actual problem is. Something that we try to avoid at Greenlink is coming in and saying we know what the problem is, and then solving our own problems that we are presenting to the community. That's not the right way to do it. It's to understand what the community wants, what the community understands is the actual issue, and then codifying that in some way. Where I really get involved is this middle thing, the action and identification, which is really the beep, boop, boop modeling analytics. So that's a live view of me coding on my day-to-day. If you're ever curious what it looked like in my home office, that's very similar to what I look like on a given afternoon. Moving forward, we come up with a couple of options. There's never one solution, right? I think a lot of the complication that comes from this is solutions are not clean and they're not as apparent. If they were, we would already have solved all of these problems. But sometimes we're trading off between something that's really cost effective for a community versus something that's super progressive and will really help community in the long run. What's the right move? Well, it depends on what the community wants. And then finally, it's getting this plan passed, turning it into something like a policy or a law or some local mandate where there is accountability. Because for us, where the rubber hits the road is when we actually see something change, and the actual framework for change is set into a protected version of the law, right? So what does community engagement look like? How do we get this information? So we participated in a 2-day in-person charrette where we had folks from the community. We had about 260 different survey participants. We had some canvassing events that went on. We had a couple of roundtables that talked a little bit about what equity means in the community, what is clean energy and how does it affect the economy, and what is the built environment like how do individual buildings fit into this, right? And so we gave folks the ability to learn about some of this and understand things like weatherization. What does that mean? Equity. What does that mean? Let's look at an example of a really great building that is really the forefront of what buildings could look like. The Kennedy building on Georgia Tech campus, which is our first in Atlanta living building challenge certified building, right? So it's a technological marvel on its own. Let's show people what that looks like. And then let's talk about how health and climate change also intersect, because at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about saving the world. We live in it as well, and there are so many benefits as well as detriments if we do or do not address some of the climate issues that we're facing. So we need to start by getting everyone on the same level so we can actually have good faith conversation about how we want to move forward. So those surveys, right? Like, let's talk about why we even survey. Well, here's something that's really interesting. If I were to tell you, well, solar power and wind power, those are clean and renewable sources, right? Do you think everyone would agree? Well, if you look at the graph here, based on our survey participants, we had 95% of people say that solar is clean, and 92% of the people who were surveyed say that wind is clean. You're going to have a couple of people that say, well, what about the whole supply chain? Or what about this, that, and the other? And then they're going to disagree. And that's fine. We're not here to tell people what is and isn't just yet. We're here to understand what they know. So we can kind of keep going down the line of whether hydropower is clean, whether energy efficiency is clean. What about nuclear energy? This is a contentious topic, right? And I don't want to get into politics of that, but is nuclear clean or is it not clean? Who considers it clean and who doesn't? 30% of our survey participants, said it was clean. This is an indication to us that maybe if we're moving towards a clean energy plan for Decatur, we shouldn't be thinking about optimizing the nuclear arsenal or the nuclear aspects of the energy grid in order to capture that clean energy transition. Seems like the community is not as interested in counting that as part of their clean energy, accounting, right? What is something a little bit more nebulous, like biogas? What does biogas even mean? You can actually see, based on the participants, almost half people said yes and almost half people say no. So now this gives us an opportunity to say, all right, well, there's a little bit of education we need to provide here as well to get people to understand what these technologies are, why they may or may not be considered clean, and just, again, continuing to assess where the community is, right? So this was already pretty helpful as we're drawing out this clean energy plan. Here's something else that's really interesting. When we talk about decarbonizing, which means removing all carbon sources from whatever operations, whether that's the energy grid or otherwise. For us, we mean the energy grid when I say decarbonization. We were able to survey who wants what level of decarbonization. 100% renewable, 75% renewable, or 50% renewable. And the high level takeaways here are that at least 63% of people want at least 75% renewable clean energy as their grid tied energy by 2030, right? And 80%, over 80% want at least a 50-50 split of renewable to non-renewable by 2030. But at the end of the day, everyone wants to make this change by 2030. So this is good. Now we're coming up with design constraints for our clean energy plan, right? We can decarbonize in 2025 or even decarbonize in 2050. What would that look like? We now know that the residents of Decatur want all of this to happen by 2030, and overwhelming number of them want at least 50% of clean energy by 2030. This is a really good starting point. Notice that Greenlink is not coming in and saying you need to be 100% renewable by 2035 or 2040 or 2050. That can be advice that we can give should the community want to, but there are a number of things to consider when a community is deciding how they want to decarbonize. One of them is how much are they willing to spend? This is all going to cost something. And doing our survey here, we found that 88% of the people would be okay to spend $5 or more a month on their energy bills to ensure that they are moving towards clean and renewable energy, right? $5 may not seem like a lot. So what happens if we say $15 a month? Well, now about a third of the people are willing to spend that. So we now need to think about Is 5 appropriate? Do we push to 15? Is there some number in between? And really, at the end of the day, what is the value of $5 increase on the average bill in Decatur, or really any community? For some folks, $5 can be a lot. For some folks, $5 isn't really anything. So let's look at the demographics of Decatur here. We have what's called the Greenlink equity map, called GEM, and we have the ability to look at a number of demographic indicators, including how much energy burden a neighborhood experiences on average. Energy burden is how much of your annual income you are putting towards your energy bills as a percentage. At 3%, you're starting to feel a little bit of that energy burden. At 10%, you're choosing between keeping your lights on and keeping a meal at the dinner table for your family. It's an unfair choice, but this is the reality of what a burden actually is. If we look at the median household incomes of the 4 census tracts, we can see that they're quite high. In fact, they're extraordinarily high. A lot of people don't make this much money, and so when you're looking at this, you can see that $5 for a lot of the residents isn't actually a lot. So maybe we err towards that side when we're thinking about investments. But we always want to center this on equity. Just because most people can afford something like this doesn't mean there shouldn't be protections for those who can't. So we've identified that around 14% of the households in Decatur spend more than 10% of their income on energy bill. They're severely energy burdened. So at this point, maybe we can increase the bills by $5 for most of the residents, but we need to make sure that we have some protections in place for the folks who can't, through some policy, through some legislation, through a couple of pilot programs, and we'll get into what those look like. But it's important to know that high energy burdens are especially common for renters, low-income households, and especially communities of color, and that these are disproportionately impacted by systemic racist housing policies that have just matriculated into the modern era, right? And so as a way to equalize everything, we need to make sure that we're shedding a little bit of light as we are also moving to a clean energy future. So, and there are ways to do that. There are ways to do that without tanking the entire ship. I'll get into those in a minute here. So let's talk about some clean energy goals that have actually come out of this. From our charrette and from our community engagement and working with the city of Decatur, here are the targets. By 2030, all municipal buildings need to use 100% clean and renewable energy. By 2035, the municipal fleet needs to be fully electrified, and community buildings need to be 100% clean and renewable. And then by 2050, everything needs to be 100% clean and renewable. So these are some important milestones that we can use as we're creating this clean energy plan, right? So when I went back with our team and we decided to crunch some numbers, we looked at a couple of different cases. Over here, BAU means business as usual. MCE means most cost effective. We have a social and local impact scenario, and then we have our maximum case. So business as usual just means we're not doing anything. We're just going to let the boat ride the waves on wherever they need to go, and we will be where we will be at that point. Maximum case here means we're doing everything in our power. The city of Decatur is doing everything in its power to turn to a 100% renewable operation by 2030, 2035, and 2050. And the two cases in between balance cost effectiveness with maximizing social and local impacts. And I'll talk about what that means. So maximizing social and local impacts, as I mentioned before, it's not just about producing or removing the most amount of carbon from the air. It's also about injecting a little bit of power into the local economy via jobs, via education. There's also health benefits when you take out a coal plant and it's no longer polluting. Surprise, the folks around that coal plant, their breathing and health problem get better, right? And there are days of work lost that you no longer have to incorporate in your estimates of the folks that are living there. So you just get a healthier population, and that's worth something, right? We want our communities to be, what was it, thriving and equitable and fair, right? So that's part of what the social and local impact looks like. The numbers that I've highlighted here talk about the benefit and the cost ratio. So the higher that benefit and cost ratio, the more you are getting back per dollar spent. So if you look at the maximum scenario, you've got this 7.4 number, which means for every dollar you're spending into the scenario, you're getting $7.40 back. For the most cost-effective scenario, as you might expect, you're getting $12.20 back for every dollar spent on investments in that scenario. So obviously it's the most cost effective. And then you have the one in the middle, the social local impact, which is you're getting $9 back for every dollar spent on this. So we present this to the community members and the city of Decatur, and we think about, well, where does what do these different scenarios look like in terms of energy supply forecasts and transportation? Where's the energy coming from? And this graph, I don't need to get into it, but it just really sort of tells you how different energy supply would be associated with each of the scenarios, and then also what kind of transportation we would expect if we're investing in these different scenarios, whether it's EVs or cycling or car reduction. So here's a little bit of what we presented. And what was the outcome? Well, on September 26th of last year, the Decatur City Commission adopted our clean energy plan that we proposed, and the community chose the social local impact scenario, that middle ground, not too aggressive, but better than baseline. And that tells you that there is obviously some hunger for the community to move into a fast and into a fair and sustainable future as quickly as possible, right? That's really exciting. This is a video of how Greenlink was reacting as soon as we heard about the plan being adopted by the city commission. So we were all elated. I told you I'd talk to you a little bit about the policies. I just wanted to round out everything by saying this. The work isn't done here. Now we have the plan, but we now need to create policies. We need to create a system of accountability. And what does that mean? Well, it can be anything from going into the energy, our utility IRPs, the integrated resource plans, and advocating for more renewable sources, which will happen every so many years from the Georgia Power filings. We can look into benchmarking and performance requirements for buildings so we know how buildings are operating now and how buildings will operate in the future. And then finally, I talked about weatherization or low income support. If there are low income households that cannot afford any increase in their energy, well, it's important that they don't see energy increases in their energy bills, but we also lower their existing bills so we pull them out of burden, right? 14% of a severe energy burden is still too many households in burden. So maybe we can look into weatherization low income programs. And there's something that Greenlink is working on a little later that I can bring into the scope here. But at the end of it, I have a QR code here, and I would really love it if the folks who are who are viewing this right now would go to this QR code or check out the link that I have here, cleaneducator.com, and read the plan. This plan only fails if it sits on a shelf somewhere and no one does anything with it, right? It is on all of us to make sure we're both reading the plan, holding the folks accountable to the items in the plan, and demanding that that is in fact the floor and that we're only moving forward from the plan. The plan should now become the actual backstop. We shouldn't be regressing below it. We should use that as the absolute floor. So I would highly implore everyone to take a look. We have tried to make it not as boring to read. So you can still read this and still have a good time. As always, you can reach out to those of us at Greenlink to ask any questions. I have some of my contact information over there, and also the Greenlink website is over there. But also, David Nifong from from the city of Decatur was a huge part of this plan, and it is his job to hear any feedback on this. So you can contact him at cleaneducator@gmail.com. And that's my talk. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Kavin. That was awesome. Always enjoy learning how people put things into action. All right. So now is the time, community members, if you have any questions. But in the meantime, I will I have like 1,000 questions, so we'll just start off with mine. Number one, so you kept going back to like, it's really important to make sure this is the community's plan and not just Kavin's plan, which, you know, we can show up and be, we're the government, we're here to help, and that doesn't help at all. So how do you identify stakeholder groups, and then how do you get them to show up and talk to you?
That is a really, really good question. And it's funny that you asked that. I'm like one of the furthest people from that element at Greenlink, but being a small company, you at least get to hear a lot about how it works and a lot of the strategy behind it. But we have an equity team that really does focus on this. And one of the major elements is that stakeholder engagement is not community engagement. There's actually two major players here. You've got the community level people who are the actual individual folks in the household. And then you've got the stakeholders who represent some community interest. So to your question, which I believe was, how do you get them engaged? Well, a lot of the work that we get pulled into, the community and stakeholder meetup has almost always happened already. And it is for us to actually be there and help facilitate. How community engagement can and stakeholder engagement can develop outside of us or with us is a mixture of canvassing. I mean, never underestimate the power of going door to door and letting people know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and gauging their interest. That's one major way of doing so. The second way is, while you're doing that or while you're having charrettes, ask the community who should be in the room that represents your interests, right? And stakeholders love to know that they have been thought about from the community, because that's what they actually want. They want to make sure that when a community needs something, that they know that that particular group, and stakeholders can be neighborhood associations, housing associations, community funding groups. They like to know that they are there to help something on the community side. So although we generally don't bring those people together as the start of the project, we're almost always there to help facilitate what that relationship looks like, because it involves a lot of trust and trust building. So the way we keep them involved is we continue to push this idea that we won't be able to move into a solution that's absolutely going to feel like it is owned by the community until we can establish trust. And establishing trust takes many months sometimes on a lot of projects. In fact, one of the ways we think about establishing trust and community engagement is to say that the first 7 months of an 18-month project are actually about creating that trust network before we move into any action. So it just sort of tells you how much time it takes to level set, to bring all the stakes to the table and say, we are here not to impose our solution onto you, but to have a good faith conversation with everyone at the table and actually move towards a solution that can feel like it is owned by the people who the solution is there in place for.
Awesome. That was super insightful. So I guess on that same vein, right, you were talking about like, you know, you spend a good portion of your time building community trust. Can you name like some best practices or things that you've found very effective for getting the community to trust you?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm gonna speak from what I remember from our from the person who leads it at Greenlink, and I'm just gonna hope she doesn't skewer me for butchering it too much. We have a wonderful director of community initiatives by the name of Jelly Duckworth, and so if you have more questions, I'm gonna refer you to her. But a lot of it is just, you know, in-room discussion and a lot of listening. Like, I think what we tend to forget, especially coming from the science side and coming from like the solution side, is that you don't need to come into the room with a solution. In fact, a lot of times just listening and acknowledging that the problem exists actually does a lot of work for establishing that trust. In fact, in talking to the equity team, one of the favorite moments of this process is actually has been told to me as being able to define the problem after doing a series of listening tours with community members and stakeholders from all around, actually getting to the point where we understand what the problem is, we rephrase it and represent it back to the community and have them say, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. That actually feels really good. And that only happens when we've been listening for maybe something like 5 of those 7 months that I've been mentioning, where we were establishing trust. So it's not to say that it really is just all listening, but I don't want to say that it's not really all just listening. Really, that's we're so much more willing in the solution space to be the folks to communicate and kind of give that solution. And I think it's been a helpful reminder for us to say, sometimes just get in the room and shut up and just let people talk to you or even at you. Sometimes take notes, digest it, and come back with a rephrasing to show them that you were in fact present at the points that they were highlighting.
All right, cool. That is a really great. Oh, somebody raised their hands.
It was me. So I think to follow up on that, on kind of like the other side, after you have engagement, after you have a problem and you have the solution planned, how do you deal with basically when you start presenting a solution, the not in my backyard, especially here in Atlanta and some of these other like Decatur and other areas, you do have some of that a little bit.
That's a really, really good question. And I can tell you a little bit about how we've internally dealt with some of it versus how we've externally dealt with some of it, because that's just going to change. I mean, one of the things, let me start with this. One of the things that we always have to keep in mind is that the optimal solution, the one that actually hits all of the answers, is very rarely the solution that people actually go for. And it's just because people are lie on a statistical spectrum of answers and statistical spectrum of their rationality behind those answers. So we almost always end up just regressing to the mean in some way, even if it's not the optimal, right? So if you come in knowing that there is going to be some inefficiency, I think it becomes easier to swallow that the inefficiencies are just going to be there. And you can say, all right, if you have some hardliners that say, not in my backyard right now, well, if it tanks the entire solution, it is on us to create a solution where no one part tanks the entire thing, but like I said, creates that backstop, because our solution or our plan should not be the only one that's done. Every 3, 4, 5 years, we need to be having a new Decatur clean energy plan or new community clean energy plan, because the world has shifted, the community has shifted, and we have a whole new set of inputs and understanding of the way operations are. So it's not worth it to tank anything or to push through like the most optimal plan if we're getting some pushback, so much as to draw a line in the sand where we shouldn't fall back down below, right? And that's generally how we deal with our NIMBY folks. Luckily, there is almost always some element of that translation that we can appeal to. Sometimes the NIMBY folks are like, well, I don't want this in my backyard because I don't want to see, let me give you a personal example. When I was living in New Jersey with my family, which is where I grew up, my house was the first one in our neighborhood to get solar panels. And my dad did a lot of work in order to bring the community, the neighborhood to our house and say, let me tell you about solar panels and why they're great. And one of the pushback from one of our HOA members was, I don't want to see solar panels on your house because I don't want the sunlight to reflect back into my eyes. And my dad had to just sort of take a deep breath and say, if the sunlight was reflecting back into your eyes, it wouldn't be a solar panel now, would it? Right. So there's a little bit of patience that comes with it. But he would say something, well, I understand that you don't want to see that, but can you think about, what about the home values? Maybe, here's some evidence to show you that though it won't be reflecting sunlight back in your eyes, the houses surrounding us, their property values are going to increase from what we've seen. So wouldn't you like your property value to increase? And then took that stance in order to convince all of the folks who are voting on this to allow us to be able to have it. And the good news is it worked. We were able to get solar panels. We were the first in our neighborhood to do so. And there's almost always a translation you can have for the folks who are willing to push back. And you just have to meet them there. You just have to figure out what that is and translate what you want into something that appeals to them, and then speak on that level. And if you still can't get to it, well, then, like I said, we're just drawing a line in the sand that we shouldn't fall below.
Excellent. Thank you.
I love that. That's so kind of just to the thing that I'm hearing from this is that you have to ask people why they are object to it, because their answer may, like, not in a million years would I have guessed that person's objection would be sunlight in my eyes, right? And
Totally.
yeah,
I couldn't have made that up if I wanted to, but here we are with an actual reason why someone doesn't want solar panels on their neighbor's home.
Yeah.
And it's not unlike asking someone why their favorite color is blue. Sometimes you just need to ask them, why do you like this, or why do you not like this? So that way they give language to it themselves, because sometimes you're not thinking about it that way. It's just a gut reaction.
Right. And it's really good to understand it, because then all of a sudden you could have just, if he had just been like, I don't like these, and your dad had laid out like 30 and then all of a sudden that might have just made it worse, right?
Totally,
As opposed to just be like, let's learn. So I love that. That's a really good way to think about it. And a great example. So I just want to, anybody else have questions? Throwing it out there. It's your chance. I have so many questions. I'm going to ask you a data question.
Yeah, please. Let's do it.
So, and I was thinking about this a lot. So, you guys get a lot of data to help drive decisions, and I'm a huge nerd, so I love that you're doing that. How do you achieve taking this data that makes perfect sense to you, Kavin? You're like, obviously the solution is this, right? How do you use that to convince mere mortals who are not huge data nerds that your data is actionable and relevant to them?
That's a great question. And I would actually say this is like, since I've been in the data science world, this has been one of the most, I think, enlightening transformations for me. So I'm so glad you asked that. Because here's an actual fact, and this isn't judgment on anybody, because we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, but a lot of people don't really know how to read a graph, right? And that's just the state of the world. Some of the graphs that I represented in my talk here were simple, but you would be surprised how many people will just get confused at even the simplest version of that. And we've learned not to use that as a reason to judge people by their ability to understand something. Just because you don't see a graph and understand what it's talking about doesn't mean you don't have the ability to understand what it actually represents, right? And so why this job has become fun for me is because I get the chance to think almost on a daily basis, what are the 2 or 3 different ways I can represent this particular data set that 2 or 3 groups of people who wouldn't be able to see things in the way that I see a particular, trend would be able to gravitate to or comprehend, what this data actually shows. And what's really cool about that is it forces me and my team to be like, what are the different facets of this data that are actually important? As an engineer, you're taught really a lot to think about a lot of the sort of, how do I say it? Maybe like the sort of linear outlook of a trend. Like, what is the shape of the curve? What's the change over time of the curve? How does it look in 2D and 3D space? And you're trained to think about it like that. And when you're trained to think about things like that, it becomes hard to realize just because you can represent something in a 3D model doesn't mean you should be representing things in a 3D model when you're talking to people about it. So what kind of language can I add? Can I say, well, when people think of clean energy, they're thinking of solar and and wind, but they're not thinking about nuclear, rather than saying, well, nuclear accounts for 30% of approval between, for all the people that have surveyed. That doesn't mean anything. So really thinking about how to translate the language of math into the language of really English, and just sort of like the idea space, is one that we really challenge ourselves on a ton. How I, this is a long-winded answer, but how I go about it, I just try to throw stones in every direction possible. I'm like, well, what if someone couldn't read a line? What if someone couldn't read a graph? What if someone doesn't understand what the word percent means? Right? How would I change this? And I think I talked to you about this a lot, Amy, but I'll tell everyone else here. But one of my favorite books is Randall Munroe's book Thing Explainer, which is his use of, and I think you purchased that soon, or maybe use it. It's something like the 200 or 300 most common words in the English language, and it's Randall Munroe, this comic artist who does the infamous XKCD comics, saying, I'm going to explain really complicated topics, everything from black holes to subatomic particles, using the 200 to 300 most common English words. And if he can do that, I can definitely translate anything that I'm looking for to the general population.
Awesome. The Thing Explainer is one of my favorite books. It's also, I finally learned how a dishwasher works out of that.
Yeah, that's right.
So
you learn things.
I learned things. I was like, that, who knew, right? Like, I was always like, a dishwasher is this magical thing that makes my plates clean, and now I know, right? Like, I never actually thought about how it worked.
Right.
There's like 100% chance my dog's gonna lose it in the next 3 minutes, but I apologize for that. So I do, just kind of going on that, I love that. So the public health officials refer to your approach as the Swiss cheese approach, right? Like, you got to layer down like 10 approaches, and then hopefully you've hit all the different types of listeners in your audience.
Right.
Which I also love. It's a great like analogy for like, well, you can't just do it once, you have to do it like 6 different ways.
Right.
And then kind of on the flip side though, right? Like, that's how you go back to, but when you're sitting with the decision makers, right? Like, you've had all this community engagement, and the community has even been like, I want these 6 things, right? Like, what data then tends to be the most persuasive to the decision makers?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think this is one of the more enlightening ones, moving out of the pure engineering space and moving into the policy side, which is a lot of the decision makers, many of whom are elected officials, have a limited term in which they are in that seat and effective. And on top of that, they are balancing maybe 100 different initiatives or objectives or interests that they have. So your time with them and your ability to capture their momentum is this big. So it is an exercise on asking what makes the most sense from their side. And for them, they are there to optimize. Whether, anyone's thoughts on politics aside, the game is that any elected official is here to maximize well-being for their constituents, whether it's jobs, whether it's investments and local debt, whether it's safety and comfortability of their residents. Right, these are the things that actually matter. No one is thinking about tons of carbon dioxide. I mean, in fact, I've been in this field for how long now, and I really couldn't tell you what a ton of carbon dioxide actually looks like. And here's like the most convoluted way of thinking about it. Maybe not the most convoluted, but here's one where we can all relate to, and it still doesn't make sense. The average car emits 1 ton of carbon dioxide every 2,500 miles. And suppose the average American drives something like 12,500 miles. We're talking about 20% of the time, if you're an average American driving an average American car for an average American length of time, 20% of the time that you're in that car equals 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And so that means what, like roughly every 10 weeks, like you're emitting like a ton of carbon. I don't even know what that feels like. Like, it's, I understand what that is, and it still makes no sense to me. And then on top of that, when you have to say, well, we need to subvert millions and billions of tons of carbon, like we're talking about abstract space that If I'm not comfortable with, I can definitely say a lot of people aren't. And if you are comfortable with that type of number, you're a better person than I am. And I'm really glad you can think in terms of carbon dioxide units, because I can't. But what we can talk about is money. We can talk about jobs. We can talk about lives lost prevented, right? And we can translate all of these investments into a clean energy future into those types of metrics. So I can say, by shutting down these coal plants and adding this many more solar and wind facilities, you're going to lose this many coal jobs, but you're going to gain twice as many green jobs. And so, hey, there's an opportunity for worker education and replacement into a new field, like you, hey, congressperson, mayor, city council member. Doesn't that sound like a great thing to add into your cap? Great feather to add to your cap. Or here's the economic benefit of it. It's going to add this much to your local domestic product. That sounds really great, right? You're going to have that in your term. Or think about the lives that you're going to save just from the pollution aspect of it. It's this many thousands. It's like filling UGA Stadium 2 times over. You can understand what that means, right? So we'll translate it into those numbers so people really know what the effect is. Because at the end of the day, if the effect is the same, and it's going to cause the same action, whether or not you think in carbon units or not, we're moving forward. And that's, like I mentioned, where the rubber hits the road, when we actually get action from some of our ideas.
This is awesome. It's almost like you can teach my data science or our science communication class, right? Because it's great to know that the things that we talk about how translating abstract numbers into things that people can touch or feel or visualize, right? Like, and that is a great point, right? Like, you and I live and breathe in this environmental space, and a ton of CO2 is still like this meaningless object to me, right? Whereas if you're like, if you do this, you'll save this many lives or you'll create this many jobs. It's so much easier to like put a finger on it. I used to do nuclear physics, and someone created what they call the banana index, which is this magical thing. But bananas, every banana has a bit of radiation in it because potassium is naturally radioactive. And so you can use that to explain like the danger of an X-ray or something like that, right? Like, this is worth like 100 bananas, whereas Chernobyl was like the volume of the world in bananas, right? Like, so you can just kind of like visualize, okay, 10 bananas versus 20 million bananas, you're gonna be okay, right? Like, and it's very like, once you explain that to people, they don't freak out as much too, right? Because they're like, oh, well, I've eaten a banana.
Right.
There's 10
I know
bananas.
how much a banana's worth, right? I may not be able to feel the energy from it, but I know what a crap ton of bananas looks like, and that seems like a crap ton of bananas.
Right. Like, whereas, and you're just like, maybe don't eat 3 billion bananas in one day. You might have other problems then, right? So like, it's very like, so that's sort of like translation. And I love that you were like, and the policymakers just need, they're only there for like 4 years and they need to make an impact for their constituents. And that's a great way to think about it.
And I would say, I would just add that one of the best things about taking that approach is, from that approach, you can talk to folks on all sides of politics. It is nonpartisan. You can find something that they care about that you also care about, and you can move forward. And how wonderful is it to be able to talk to someone who doesn't think like you and find common ground, especially in this day and age, right? And so this is it's something that we pride ourselves on a lot at Greenlink, and it's so we're very passionate about that translation part.
Yeah, that's magical too. Yeah, it's really great when you sit down with someone that you're like, I think we disagree on 99% of the issues, but we're here today and we're agreeing on jobs and kids staying in school because they don't have asthma, right?
Exactly.
Like, go team.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. I see Patrick's beautiful face on the screen. Did you have another question?
No, not necessarily. I was definitely agreeing with everything. Do we have any other questions in the chat? Just go ahead and unmute and let us know.
Okay. Otherwise, we got like 3 minutes left.
I've got one thing I would like to add just as a final plug.
Great.
Yeah, go for it.
Perfect.
Just to close everybody out, and I'm going to throw this in the chat here. This is a blog post that we just put out at Greenlink, and it's about a new initiative, a new pilot project called Weatherize that's happening around Atlanta right now, that involves Sustainable Georgia Futures as well, and in the city of Atlanta, of course, the Office of Sustainability. And it is our first pilot project to understand how we can reduce energy burdens around folks in town by weatherizing their homes and giving them the help that they need in order to make a safer and more energy efficient home, for many reasons. One, because it's healthy. Two, it'll decrease their energy burdens. But three, this can be the pilot for a much larger and very necessary program just around the United States. Forget even Georgia, where we're continually helping folks maintain a safe baseline for their homes. So I'd love everyone to take a look at this article and read a little bit about it. This involves a lot of community engagement and a lot of the techniques that I mentioned in the talk here. And it is kicking off, and it has been so successful so far. And I'd love to tell you all more about it when we get to close that off and have some lessons learned as well.
That is excellent. Thank you.
That is awesome. So that was great. It was like I threw you the softball and you just hit it out of the park, because I was going to ask you what you wanted to say to close, and that is perfect. And for sure we'll have you back, because I always love having our friends from Greenlink on this. Maybe next time we'll do it in person.
That'd be great.
I would love that. But I think that's all we got from everyone. So this is being recorded, so we can share this with the world when we're done. But I would like to thank Kavin for being an awesome speaker, and I would like to thank all y'all for tuning in and listening to our Fireside Chat. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Amy. Thanks,
Thanks.
Patrick.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming out.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation. For more information on Science for Georgia's mission and our past work, visit our website at scienceforgeorgia.org.